Need for Speed on the PS2. Too Fast, Too Furious. Shitty. Old. Fast. Slow. Cool. Cheap. Tuning. Many words come to mind when looking at the third-gen Eclipse. Today, we'll be talking about my experience owning, driving, and working on my 2001 Eclipse. Most sources claim 200 horsepower to be stock for the 3.0. But with my cold air intake, I'm probably pushing somewhere around 500 or so. This is not a fast car. It does well around town and it feels nimble, but it's not fast. The suspension is stiff enough and it actually does really well in the snow. Front-wheel drive with decent clearance makes this a very fun car in snow or on gravel roads. I would regularly get 25 miles per gallon out of the 3.0 GT engine, and that's not bad for a six-cylinder from 20 years ago. My car was made in October of 2000, according to the door panel. When I got this car, the clutch was shot. At only 73,000 miles, you would expect plenty of life left, but no. The clutch was gone, and this isn't an isolated problem. According to the third-gen forums, a lot of these would just kind of die at fairly low mileage. The clutch was one of the few parts of this automobile that was actually made in Japan, but I'll touch more on that later. I replaced the stock clutch with a basic XD replacement and a flywheel that I got off eBay that weighed about 8 pounds. I would definitely recommend this upgrade as it made the engine feel far more responsive. I also had to go through the entire engine and replace all of the vacuum lines with red silicone to eliminate a vacuum leak. I put some drilled and slotted brake rotors on as well, and they worked very nicely. The alternator failed twice on me. The first time, I replaced the stock alternator at 76,000 miles with the cheapest one I could find on eBay. I think it was like $30. Then I got to replace it again in my dorm parking lot at 17 below zero. Changing an alternator is not something I would recommend doing in Alaska during January. But the moral of the story here is do not buy a $30 alternator off eBay. The Eclipse has had quite the impact on my generation. When they came out, they were cheap, pretty cool, and fairly quick. They were accessible to young people and still make a really good car to get into the hobby. Most of them were manuals in a world where that was becoming rare, and they were everywhere in media. From video games to movies to car magazines and Matchbox toys, these cars were everywhere, and people still recognize them today. It always surprises me how much more attention this car gets than my '96 Z28. The Camaro is far faster, much louder, and, in my opinion, a lot cooler. But people only come up and talk to me when I bring the Eclipse to a car show. There has always been this misconception that this was some exotic Japanese sports cars. But in reality, they were all made in a town called Normal, Illinois. They are almost all Mopar parts and share 70% parts compatibility with the Chrysler Subaru and Stratus Coupe. The engine, transmission, and suspension are all just Dodge parts. In recent years, the value of these cars has really increased. Most of the young people who bought them 20 years ago destroyed them, and they're getting really hard to find in good condition. Overall, this was a fun car. I owned it for 2 winters and I never got stuck. It was fast enough for me to have fun and fuel efficient enough to be my daily driver. I sold it recently, but not because I didn't enjoy it. I simply didn't need 3 cars and this one made sense to sell. I would definitely recommend this car to anybody looking for a fun commuter at a decent price. Maybe a high school or college student or a lower enlisted military member. For the price, they're lots of fun, fairly stylish, and easy to work on. 8 out of 10.